Welcome back to The Price of Business. I'm your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business. You know what? It's your business to be well-read, to be informed, to use some of that money to better yourself. Recently, I got a copy of a book called The Return of George Washington, found it very intriguing, and wanted to spend some time visiting with the author of it, Ed Larson. I think it's great reading, and particularly great holiday reading, I think it's always good to kind of reflect where we've come from as a nation and how we've got here, and understanding particularly the role of the Founding Fathers is really excellent. And Ed, welcome to the program. Glad to have you on.
Thank you very much.
Tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into the book.
Well, I teach history at Pepperdine University in California and am also a writer, writing a variety of books in this field or in other fields. Great
school. In fact, I almost went there. I weighed Abilene Christian University with Pepperdine, and went and visited Pepperdine and said, "There's no way in the world I'll ever graduate." I looked at the beaches in front of me and I saw the mountains behind me, and I said, I'll have a blast, but I'll never finish. And so I went to Abilene Christian University and got a great education there, and was not nearly as distracted. So, but it's a great school. Pepperdine's become a very prestigious school. So, glad to have you on the program to talk a little bit about your book. And I'm assuming your specialty is in American history. Any specific area in American history?
I do a variety of different areas in American history. I focus in the history of science as well as in constitutional history, political history. I teach both law at Pepperdine and also teach undergraduate history. So I have feet in two camps.
Very good, very good. So tell us about it's not like there's not a lot of work written about George Washington. I would assume that after Abraham Lincoln, he's probably the most written about president in U.S. history. So what compelled you to write another book about Washington?
I'm sure you're right on that figure. My guess is he's probably the first or second most written about American of any type, not just president, of anybody. But the amazing thing is they left an opening for me. There's a tremendous number of books about him as a general. He was a great general. There are a tremendous number of books about him as president. But what they skip is there's a 6-year period in between where he stepped down as general and went back to his plantation and worked on his plantation, but also worked on forming the new Union before he becomes president. And that period is virtually overlooked, even biographies about Washington. And that's when he shines as a business person, recreating his plantation and making it successful, a variety of new techniques. When he visits the frontier, explores the frontier, and sees what's needed to keep the frontier in the Union. But most critically, when he begins working with other like-minded nationalists, people like Madison and John Jay and Robert Morris and Benjamin Franklin, to create, well, as they eventually called it, a more perfect union, where they take the failed Articles of Confederation, where the country was falling apart, was losing its mooring, was actually in danger of losing its independence, and come up with a constitution and a effective national government that has been the model for the rest of the world.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm sure you're obviously very familiar with the Anti-Federalist Papers, which has never gotten quite the traction as the Federalist Papers. But it's interesting to see how much they said would happen under the Constitution that has happened. Everything from an imperial presidency to a judicial branch that would legislate to a very weak legislative branch, to the potential of a massive bureaucracy that would have autocratic power. I begin to wonder, because clearly there was weaknesses in the articles, but clearly, and really starting with Madison versus Marbury, everything is proven to be true.
This book, I follow those very closely. I give much more attention to the anti-federalist writings than virtually any book on the topic, and because I find them fascinating and the challenges they rise. And indeed, some of the people most closely involved with it was probably the most central person was George Clinton, who was a very, very close friend of George Washington. George Clinton was a longtime governor of New York, and he was the most prominent anti-federalist. And the critique that goes back and forth between them, because I'm trying to follow this narrative of how this happened and the role Washington played in it. And Washington gets dropped out of it in many ways. It becomes the story of Madison as the architect of the Constitution, and that story is sufficiently deficient in many cases because, I mean, when you think about it, George Washington was the most famous American during the Revolution. He'd become a national celebrity. He was the one person that all Americans admired. Again, he had that role as president. And so the question I asked was, what was he doing in between? Was he just being a farmer? Well, he was being an innovative farmer, and that's interesting how he brought in new farming techniques and was truly an engaged in agriculture and writing for agricultural journals in England. He came up with so many new ideas, but he was also forging this new government because he saw the frontier was being lost. The British had not left. States were talking about leaving the Union. You had massive inflation, hyperinflation in Rhode Island because they were printing money because the state had been taken over by the debtors. You had a rebellion in Massachusetts of the debtors against the creditor-controlled government. You had no effective national army to control the country. You didn't even have a national market economy, and he believed these were necessary. He wasn't alone. He agreed. Madison was very much involved, John Jay, others, but he believed that you needed to pull this country together to protect individual liberty and private property, because he saw that individual liberty, private property, even independence were being lost without the government. Now, they knew it was a balancing act. That balancing act has had problems as we've gone forward, as you point out. That's the debate that this book covers, and I think that's why people are finding it so interesting to re-engage in that debate.
Yeah, seems to me that Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, the last one, the last item there is the so-called necessary and proper cause, and in spite of things like the Ninth Amendment and the 10th Amendment, which I believe explicitly amended the necessary and proper clause. That's the way I interpreted it. It appears, though, history proves that that those who believe that it gave them carte blanche, people like Alexander Hamilton believe it gave carte blanche to government, have proven to be correct historically, and sadly, I would argue.
You are absolutely right on the necessary and proper clause. That was put in there intentionally by Gouverneur Morris. Alexander Hamilton knew exactly what it meant. That's discussed in the book, that debate over the necessary proper clause, and right from the beginning, anti-federalists like George Clinton and Patrick Henry pointed to the necessary proper clause as potentially the most dangerous clause in the Constitution. So it wasn't missed at the time. It was recognized at the time. It was recognized what happened. That part of the story I try to cover in the book. I think that's why it's important for all sides to read the full story, and that's what I'm trying to give here.
Yeah, I agree. And I haven't had a chance to read the whole book, but I've read huge parts of it. I really enjoy it. I do appreciate the fact that you're talking about which is largely ignored history, particularly I think the great arguments made, and they're difficult to read. The Federalist Papers are easy to read compared to the Anti-Federalist Papers, to be perfectly honest with you. But they're both very, very worth the time, and I think accompanied with a great historical narrative like your book, all the more so. And so, Dr. Larson, I appreciate you spending time with us, and I encourage you to learn more about his book. What would be the best site to get people to learn more about you, Dr. Larson?
You can always look at the Pepperdine homepage. You mentioned Pepperdine. It's a great school, I agree, though Abilene Christian is too. I agree with that as well.
Go Wildcats.
But you can also find things about me on Amazon and different things, because the book's available there. The book's available, I hope, everywhere.
It should be, absolutely, and I think it's serious reading and very worthwhile. And so check out. By the way, if you're catching this interview now and you really want to get more information, we're going to have an article about this at usdailyreview.com, and plus Price of Business website will have a link to it as well in the audio section. And so, Dr. Larson, thanks for your time.
Thank you so much. Hope you have a great holidays.
You too. And again, give us the name of the book.
The name's The Return of George Washington, 1783 to 1789. That's the forgotten period.
That's 6 years, very, very well documented, thoroughly covered. You're going to be impressed just when you pick up the volume. Thanks so much, sir.
Thank you.
When we come back, much more for you. Do want to remind you, best content here shows up over there at usdailyreview.com, and this is The Price of Business.
It's been getting so hard living with the things